In today's video, I'm going to explain exactly how much fruit you should be eating on the animal-based diet. My name's Lockie Oliver. I'm an ancestral health coach and I put my Crohn's disease into remission without doctors or medication with the animal-based diet. Since then, I've helped hundreds of people lose fat and optimize their gut health with ancestral eating. And today, I'm going to help you do the same. When deciding how much fruit you should be eating, it comes down to two things. The first one, how is your gut health currently? Do you have gut issues like Crohn's, IBS, leaky gut, skin issues like psoriasis, eczema? If that sounds like you, I would be cautious with how much fruit you're eating. If you don't have any gut issues, then you don't need to be as cautious. The reason being, fruit contains fructose, which is still sugar. And that sugar can feed the bad bacteria and parasites in your gut. In most cases, you can eat fruit in moderation, but if you're still having symptoms like skin issues or gut issues, then maybe reduce the fruit intake and see if it improves. The second thing we need to focus on is your activity level. If my client is an athlete, or they're just someone who trains a lot, or they've got a very active job, those kind of people are gonna need a higher carb intake to support their training and recovery. If that's someone like you, you're training and you wanna prioritize performance, I'd have a slightly higher carb intake, prioritizing things like dates, banana, honey, and maybe even sweet potato if you tolerate it. Having carbs multiple times throughout the day, and especially prioritizing them around your training. If you're having a harder training session, I would have things like dates, banana, and honey before or after your training session, along with some salts or electrolytes. The main shift that happens with athletes or high performers when they are eating this way is that we're not prioritizing things like pasta, bread, rice. We're getting our carbs from nutrient-dense whole foods, so banana, dates, mangoes, sweet potato, and honey. We've been told for so long that if you want to perform, you need pasta, bread, rice, cereal, and it's just not true. All of those foods have pesticides, bullshit ingredients, very harmful things inside those food products that you're putting right into your gut. When you switch to an ancestral or animal-based diet, you are prioritizing single ingredient foods that are jam-packed with nutrients. They're much easier on your gut, they help improve your hormones, and as a result, your performance will go through the roof. But if you're someone that's just trying to lose some weight, you work in an office, you don't have a very active job, and maybe you train a few times a week, your requirements for carbohydrates are going to be a shitload lower. Fruits that are great for fat loss would be things like blueberries, watermelons, strawberries, much lower in calories than things like dates, mango, and banana. So you can eat a large volume of these foods without blowing out your calories. And then for your main meals, instead of having things like sweet potato or adding honey on top for carbs, I would have things like pumpkin, zucchini, or squash because they're very low in calories but very filling. So if you're trying to lose weight, keeping yourself full is really important. Pumpkin, to be honest, is probably one of the best foods that you can eat for fat loss because it is so low in calories and so bloody filling. So if you're someone who's training a lot or very active at work, you would want to go slightly higher carb. If you're someone who's not training as much and you're more so focusing on fat loss, then you'd want to go slightly lower carb. The reason I would go lower carb if you're trying to lose fat is because protein and fats are much more filling than carbohydrates and they take a lot longer to digest. Carbohydrates can digest in as little as 30 minutes, which is why you can eat them before you train and feel fine. But if you're eating things like, say, slow cooked meat or a steak, that's going to take 5 to 6 hours to digest, so keeping you full a lot longer, which is why during a fat loss phase, I always prioritize protein and fats over carbohydrates. You don't need to cut out carbs completely, but they're just not a priority during that phase. So how do we actually put a meal plan and macros together? Well, first off, we always prioritize protein. I aim for anywhere from 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight. So if you're 80 kilos, you'd want to aim for 160 grams of protein per day. Carbs and fats is where it varies person to person and there is no one size fits all approach. You've probably heard people say you only need 1 gram per kilo of body weight for your protein. The reason I go a little bit higher with the protein than most people you've probably seen, because if you're facing problems where your body isn't absorbing nutrients as well as it should, it's much better to go on the higher end over the lower end for your protein target. So if by chance your body isn't absorbing the protein as efficiently as it can, at least you're on the higher end, not on the lower end. Carbs and fats are where it varies person to person. For your fat intake, I like going 1 gram to 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight as a minimum. So if you're 80 kilos, you would want to have 80 grams of fat per day. I do generally like going higher than that, but it really just depends on the person. So once you figure out your protein and fat intake, then you base your carbs from there. And remember, if you're someone who's training a shitload, your carb intake is going to be higher. If you're someone who's not very active, you don't really need as many carbs. And that is how you structure your carb intake on an animal-based diet.